is that, yes, we fantasize small cities, and we have seen here in 50s in US city centers going vacant, and it's still hard for us to fill it back. And now again, people are driving out back and all. So I think the question is, if at all we fantasize some of these small cities and rural cities, there are many other issues that we have seen in the US, particularly speaking. And right from public health availability to right now, people talking about if at all you're working from home, you don't have sufficient bandwidth even for IoT-enabled working. So there are so many different issues that are around it. And I live near New York City. I have seen that some of the big cities can handle this very well. So there are different issues around it. I think density or big cities is not the problem. It's about how we handle it and when we handle it.
Okay, there is other question, Fatak, for you. Is that yesterday Sheila mentioned something about Paris talking about a 15-minute city. Something that Rajesh is alluding to, everything within 15-minute distance, you don't want to travel. So how do you address that? And Rajesh ji, cities still have the informal sector, the whole city's economy and the wage goods that we talk about is all dependent on that. So if the poor moved out of the slums, they will start demanding higher wages, higher salary. We still will have. So how do you handle this notion of, question of informality, both in the housing and workspace in the cities? So to both of you, Fatak has addressed the slum issues in Mumbai for many years. So I want to get your comments.
Let me
Rajesh
first, just respond. Yeah, let me just respond a couple of points. I don't think economy of America has 90% of its workforce in the unorganized sector. It may be becoming more unorganized or informal, but it doesn't have that. All right. When we have an economy which is largely in the unorganized, when you have informal workforce as a large part of your economic actor, then the way you visualize location of economic activity, which drives the building of the cities, has to be different. You know, this NCR as a model was a complete disaster during pandemic. People were stuck between Faridabad, Noida, and Gurgaon borders for hours because one silly government did another silly government did something else. And those who were inside Gurgaon were enjoying the bar. My colleagues living in Gurgaon could come to Priya office in Delhi. So why was this happening? Because we visualize that you can drive 70 kilometers and come back, or go by metro and come back, etc., etc. So I think the post-pandemic, this issue will come up. It may be just a phase. As Vatsal said, maybe after 50 years, we will again populate high density as it happened in US. But people are moving out, gonna move out, and economic activity move out. You know, when the downtown Manhattan become livable and walkable and safe at night, when corporate headquarters moved out to nearby states, and you know, so this is going to happen. Economic investment will move, and if policy supports that, then it can make cities livable. The second thing is that the mega city issue, we compare mega city and we forget smaller cities. You know, we have been working in Ajmer, in Muzaffarpur, in Jhansi on water and sanitation for last 4 or 5 years. Now, Jhansi is, you can bike in Jhansi. You can get killed in Delhi if you try to bicycle anywhere, despite all the fancy bike lanes that were made during the Commonwealth Games. So, because you can't bike for 25 kilometers in Delhi, but in Jhansi for 3.5, 4 kilometer distance, you can bicycle. So what I'm saying is that, you know, there are 5 or 6 or 10 maybe mega cities or metro places in India, but there are 7,000 other cities. We don't seem to pay attention to them, their requirement. And as Mr. Pathak said, if standardized templates are going to be used for planning, we will have standardized problems. And solutions
Fatak,
can only be local.
Fatak, you want to come in on that? Unmute.
That's a very apt comment on all this idea of having statewide common set of regulations. You can have common set of regulations for fire safety and strength of structures, but you can't have common set of regulations for land use zoning, density, FSI, parking, what are the streets cross sections, whether you have cycles or not. Now, those are very city specific issues, but if you cover all that into one single set of regulations, then nothing much is left for the planners to do in a single city. But that's a different, but you said something about slums and Paris together, so I didn't understand what was the question. Unmute.
No, there was a question on 15-minute cities yesterday, but that was different. And I think Rajesh is alluding to that. But the other issue was informality in cities.
Right.
And I said, you dealt with slums in Mumbai. So is there a solution in sight?
No. I think the problem about informality itself is that it's a very ill-defined concept. What do you mean by informal? You know, when you say that slums are informal, that's a one way of putting it there. When you say informal establishments, then it's a different kind of thing. And when you say informal employment, it's a different kind of issue. And to put everything together is a problem because it's not the same. Like I used to say that when I stopped being a public servant, for 12 years, I was an informal worker because I was working from home without any institutional affiliation. So that's one extreme. But say Ola, Uber drivers, are they formal or informal? Are they same as rack pickers and street vendors? No. So I think clubbing it, because the recent statistics shows in the global south, something like 70% of non-agricultural employment is in informal sector. Now, if that is the case, then you can't have a common sort of policy or framework for that. No,
I think it was informal settlement, informal housing.
Settlements, okay. Now, the why Mumbai slums are spread out, they are not at the periphery. They are right in Nariman Point, in Malabar Hill, in Juhu, in near Bandra Kurla complex, because of this 15-minute business. Because they can't afford to spend time and money on long travels. So, but the problem is with the middle class housing. Mumbai, it takes 2.5 hours to go from one place to other during the peak hours. And the studies are now showing that the large cities which manage something like 70 to 80% of the people within 1 hour commuting distance, they are more efficient than other cities. So I think that's a different kind of problem. So the other slum issue that you said, particularly about Mumbai, this mirage which has been created that all slum dwellers and all chawl dwellers of Mumbai, who constitute 70% of population, will get a free house. That's not going to work. But that's a golden trap, politically laid out. So nobody wants to get out of that trap.
Okay, thank you. And I think on this 15-minute city and transit-oriented development, I want to call upon Paramita Roy to talk about her work. And so, Devjani, could you please introduce Paramita?
Yes, I will call her Romy Roy because she's known as Romy Roy to most. Paramita is not something which we all know her with. So Romy is an architect, urban designer, and she has 20 years of experience leading, implementing large-scale projects in Asia, Africa, Europe, Russia, United States, and Middle East, and integrating urban planning with infrastructure and resource management, with sustainable mobility, built form design, and economic viability at various scales, employing a multidisciplinary approach to urban design. She is presently on deputation to Indian Railway Station Development Corporation, the IRSDC, looking after the redevelopment of 100 railway stations in India, as world-class stations as per national TOD policy under the Prime Minister's program. She is also knowledge partner and member of the high-powered Committee for Traffic Management of Delhi, Ministry of Home Affairs, Government of India, and a board member of directors of Gwalior Smart City Development Corporation Limited. Romi's key projects include pedestrianization and urban design of Karol Bagh, Delhi, formulation of TOD policy of Delhi's master plan, adopted as national TOD policy in 2016, among a lot of others. Romi, over to you. Is she there?
Unmute, please. Okay. Sorry, can't hear. We cannot hear you.
I'm logged in from my phone. So, yeah.
Now we see you and hear you.
Yeah, now we can hear. Please go ahead.
I'm audible now?
Yes.
Audible?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay. So, yeah, I just made some quick notes because I just thought that it should not get lost. So, I think first of all, after the pandemic, the things that we have been talking about for the last several decades have become even more important. And I hope that it will now come into focus. And Professor Phatak has so nicely and eloquently already summarized almost everything that I wanted to say. And I would probably just like to focus on a few things which needs to be looked at in focus after the pandemic. So I'm not really going to talk about TOD because I think that's there, everybody knows about it, but the premise has been COVID, so I'm just going to just try to focus on that. So one of the very important things that has happened post-COVID, which I have been dreaming about for the last 20 years, is work from home. So so like, for example, me as a professional, my job is mostly a desk job and I don't really go to site that much. And I'm pretty much capable of managing my team online. So, but still I'm going to office. And it is a problem for me. It is a problem. I can infect someone and I can get infected. And I have a family, I can infect them as well. On the other hand, I have family who work on site. For example, my sister is an interior designer. She has sites going on. She has to go to site to supervise the site. There may be somebody like, our carpenters and our plumbers who come to our society. They have to go to work. So I think when we are talking about informal sector, we probably need to not make it amorphous. It is actually helpful to identify what it means. Like the carpenter, yes, he may be taking cash payments. He may not be in the tax bracket, so he's probably informal. But this person has to travel. And he probably cannot eat tomatoes at home if he's not growing tomatoes at home. And he cannot afford to buy the tomatoes if he doesn't go to work physically. So I think it is very, very important that we understand there is a large section of population which needs to go to work, physically go to work. And there is at least 30-40% of the population, like the IT sector has completely shifted into work from home. The government sector is not catching up. But the government sector can very easily, at least 50 to 60% of it can easily shift to work from home. Education is gradually shifting to work from home, study from home. These are doable things. And these are important from a couple of social aspects as well, that, when like the carpenter has to go to site, they all use metro, no, but they don't drive a car ever to go to work. So they all either use metro or they use auto or any other e-rickshaw and metro. That's what they use. So if we can segregate out this and have a formalized policy for work from home, which is not there as of now, and I think that is a major public policy intervention that is required in India today, making it legal so that people can work, get their work benefits, have accountability and get paid for it. This will have such long-term benefits because your travel demand will come down, your traffic pressure will come down, your carbon footprint will come down, your emissions will come down. which is what we have been talking about for so much time, but it never happened. And COVID has given us that opportunity, which we are not taking. So that's number one. Number two advantage of working from home is the female participation. It may not be such a big problem. Maybe I don't know so much about Bombay and Chennai. I do, although coming in IRSDC now, I have had the good fortune to work all over India. We are working around 50 stations all over India. So I'm getting to travel all over the country and work in these cities and, see data and everything. But female participation in the workforce in India is a problem. I don't know if you will agree or not, but at least in North India, in Delhi, it's a huge problem. And after that December 12th thing happened in Delhi in 2012, the work share of women has gone further down. People are scared. I'm myself scared. Even although, I'm a scary person myself, but I do feel scared going out on the road. And not just that, women have other responsibilities. Of course, things are changing, that men are taking, responsibilities at home. It has become less common now. The share of unmarried women has gone up in India, in the urban India. Unmarried women who don't earn a fortune, who don't have a double income, they still have to take care of their parents, or, if you're adopting a child, or you just have housework to do, even if you are a married person. And it is so much easier to balance your work if you are not having to spend 4 hours every day in commuting. It takes 1 hour in the morning to get ready, 1 hour to travel, another 1 hour to come back, and another 1 hour to, take a bath and get ready for your home chores. 4 hours I'm losing. I deserve to sleep, if nothing else. So it's a very important thing that work from home needs to be factored in as a policy intervention in urban planning. And this brings me to a very important point that Professor Phatak made, that the compartmentalization of planning is also very unfortunate. Probably it was done to create more jobs, I'm not sure. But it is not possible to do planning without having economists with you, sitting with you, without having sociologists, without having equal number of women in your team, which doesn't happen as of today, without having various other, like the people who represent the informal sector, so to say. So, for example, the public hearings that take place, Phatak sir will also be able to share. I don't know how it happens in MMRDA, but here the public hearings that take place, DDA has a process of public hearing. Now, we put out an advertisement in the newspaper, and maybe if we are lucky, maybe a radio hearing. Who reads that? And who comes to the board of hearing meetings? And who's giving you feedback? So, I find it's a farce. You're not really doing public participation. If we go into a workshop, presentations are done in English. Even today, we are talking in English. Who is listening to us? Nobody is, the 80% people who need to understand and listen and need to be heard are not there on the internet. They're not there on Twitter. They're not on seminars. So now I'll come to that sector, the informal sector. Now, the informal sector, in a lot of meetings and presentations, we hear about this, like when we talk about high density and high rise, and everybody feels that a high rise development is going to leave out the balloon wala and the chart wala. And I want to ask that, is the balloon wala and chart wala currently included in our planning? So if I see it today, when we do a street design, the street design is being done and implemented by the Public Works Department. The informal sector, so to say, the vendors are under the municipal corporation. I don't know if it's the same in other cities or not, but is there legal vending spaces available if there is a station area and there is a need for 20 vendors of different kinds and you need to give legal space to them? Is that available? I don't think so. At least not in my knowledge. I'm not seen. They will have one juice wala or ek kiosk kahin laga denge. Aajkal they have started that. I've seen 2, 3 at every metro station, but there will be a line of vendors at every station who are unaccounted for. Now they are so-called informal. Now what does that informal mean? The informal basically means he's paying hafta to somebody. He's not there for free. He is paying. But since he is not there in a legal plan, he is not part of our street design, He is not part of any, legal discourse of planning. He is informal, but he is not happy. He is still being bashed around by the police and, all sorts of things. Now, we find in our work, like especially when we were working on the pedestrianization project for Karol Bagh, there was a huge, huge problem of balancing the needs of the vendors in Karol Bagh as opposed to the shopkeepers, the big guys who own big shops and have political connects. So the political connected shopkeeper would go to the local MLA and say that I don't want this, I want parking, and I want these vendors out. He would say it openly in public meetings. I want these vendors out, otherwise I'm going to not let you remove cars. So they were blackmailing us that if you're removing the cars from our footpaths, you have to remove the vendors. This is the kind of discourse that was happening. So, and there is no legal backing. There was nothing that we could do to, keep them in place if we wanted to pedestrianize Ajmal Khan Road. So it is still going on, and that there's this whole complicated thing of TVC, and some committee has to sit, and then somebody has to do a lottery. The whole process is made so complicated that it seems like Mount Everest. You just cannot do it. While it's not really that difficult. All you need to do is every time you're designing a street, every time you're designing a market, you just have to keep space for vendors. That's all you need to do. And just give it to MCD that there are 20, 30, 40 vendor spaces here. Please auction them to your local vendors and allot them. And you can do it on a circle basis like they do it in Delhi Hat. You can say that, or not. By the way, vendors don't stay in the city for the whole year. You will have one vendor there for 2 months. Then he goes to do KT. He comes back again when, his crops are growing. He comes back for 2 months. He sells something. He again goes back. So he is not going to sit on your land permanently. He doesn't want to. He just wants to sell something for 2 months. So you can keep rotating. You need a bhutta wala barish mein. Winter mein you will have something else. Summer mein you will have a cold drink wala in the same space. So spatial planning, do we account for that? Do our policies enable this? They don't. So it's easy to say that we have to integrate informal sector. It's very difficult to do it. Now, I think just to close my comments, since we are in the education field and this is being organized by CEPT, I feel that CEPT does a fantastic job, and that's why I never miss any CEPT session, and I've been on so many juries and I've always enjoyed it. I do feel that students in CEPT are able to understand the importance of many aspects, like, for example, working with public money. That's a very important thing, that we cannot build Taj Mahal as public policy makers or urban designers. We have to work, every rupee that is being spent has to be accountable for a public budget. And I think it will be very useful if, as Professor Phatak also said, that we abolish the boundaries within our departments. And it will be great if architects can work with urban designers, with planners, with economists at the institution itself. Because what happens is that when we don't do this in the institution, the same professional is going out into the system and he is basically propagating what he has learned in college. So we have to, I remember Janet Satik Khan said once in one of her interviews when she was asked about the Broadway pedestrianization plan, that, how did you make it happen? Did people protest? How did the police cooperate? Because over here, traffic police bullies us on everything. So did the police cooperate? So she said that, when you are doing a public work of this kind, it's not that you have to talk to police or talk to the public works department. You have to be married to them. So she said that my Amanda Burden, the urban designer who was there in the planning department, and the police commissioner, and she, the transport commissioner, they used to be drinking together every night when they were doing that project for like a year. They were like best of friends. And that's how it happened. And even the Karol Bagh project, which is very complex, it's still going on. We have a group where the commissioner of the North Delhi Municipal Corporation is there on the group, and the FI, the guy who manages the lowest vendor, the lowest ground पे जो एकदम vendor से बात करता है या जो drain की cleaning करता है, that person is also there. The cleaning guy, the sweeper, MCD sweeper who we don't even know or hear about, the invisible guy who comes in the morning at 4 o'clock and sweeps our roads. He is there in that group. And there, everybody's work used to be monitored 24/7. So the sweeper would come at night at around 1 o'clock, 3 o'clock, they would sweep Ajmal Khan, and he would post pictures. And he would feel so proud that his sweeping work was being seen by the commissioner of North Delhi. So everybody got attention, and they worked together like a team, like absolute married friends. And that's why we were able to do that project. And I guess that's what we need at our education and also our government institutions. Thank you.
I could see Chirayu, and so I'll let him speak something about this, how the architects and planners at CEPT are integrated, because Rumi was praising the CEPT, but I will not talk about that. But Chirayu at some point will talk about it. This whole notion of work from home, whilst at CEPT we do this work from home teaching, I actually personally don't like. I'm still the old school chalk and blackboard guy. So I like to see body language of my students, and half the time students say bandwidth issue and they shut off their video. So I don't know if they're actually listening to me or also. Some activities will still need physical thing. I was reminded of my old friend, Richard Meyer, who taught at Berkeley, University of California. Many years ago when computers came and the same issue came, that the need for commuting will go and cities will become, that people will not commute and we can work from home, etc. And he coined a phrase called U-bit. And he said there is a human bit of information. So like computers pass on the bits of information, human interactions also pass on the U-bits. And he said the U-bits will never go away. We will always feel the need to talk face to face. So while I agree, I know TCS and a lot of IT companies have already announced that we will work from home and we will have only 5% of our staff at a physical place where they will manage the hardware. But I'm not sure if that is the new normal that we can imagine for our cities. But thanks a lot, Rumi. And I'm going to ask Manvita now to come and talk about her experiences in dealing with cities. And Debjani, please introduce Manvita.
Yes. Ms. Manvita is the director, Urban Management Center in Ahmedabad. She's received an undergraduate degree in architecture and postgrad in urban planning from CEPT. UMC Urban Management Center focuses on professionalizing urban management in India and South Asia and assists local governments in capacity building, service delivery, equity, strategic planning, and managing their heritage. Ms. Baradi has served as director for ICMA's South Asia program and has been a technical consultant for USAID. As an expert on World Bank funded program, Ms. Baradi has also worked on improving local governance, developing associations and urban planning in post-conflict Afghanistan, Indonesia, and Sri Lanka. She has also taught at CEPT since 1992. Besides working on urban management, she's also a theatre person, as in into development communications as director and actor. Manvita, over to you.
Thanks a lot, Debjani, and thanks, Dinesh bhai. Thanks for organizing this and inviting me. It's an interesting take, and a lot of people who've spoken before me have alluded to what is planning in post-COVID situation. I have a very strong opinion. Planning in isolation does not work. Though being a planner and an architect from CEPT and the ethos what we have propagated, I feel planning in isolation without management is no planning at all. The problems we've faced until now is a failure to an extent of just planners working in isolation in their offices, rooms, etc., and not being with people and the community. And I strongly believe that unless you work with the government and be partners with them, shouting from the rooftop of something which is not working is not going to help our cities. Cities are complex. Cities require help. People who run cities, like city managers, require support. And planners, unfortunately, and our education also extends that understanding that, we are some demigods who can design our cities without dirtying our hands. Planning with management understanding of how cities run and function is extremely important for all of us to understand. And ultimately, in isolation, we cannot make change. We're not going to be not the government. We're not going to be the government. We cannot replace them. We have to work with them to make change. And I guess all of us are part of this profession because we are not liking the way our cities, state, national sarkars work. And hence, as professionals, we would want to engage with them, work with them, and change the way they work. Now, how do we do that? And pandemic times very clearly showed out the invisible people, the large exodus, and the pain which we all as professionals, I'm sure every one of us were pained to see it and thought about how can we contribute. The invisible people which just emerge. And fortunately, now we have a possibility to work with two state governments, Odisha and Gujarat, to think about how migrants' problem is and how do you address as planning management professionals. I would like to talk about this specific thing which probably currently we're working, and maybe that will make us understand probably what approach to take, and it's very complex. Most workers from Odisha, I mean, there are other states, but I'm focusing on Odisha because we're currently working there. About 9 lakh workers, mostly single men, from 1 or 2 specific districts in Odisha have come to Surat, and they are very well integrated in the power loom and the textile sector. They wanted, and of course there are Mumbai and there are other, but Surat, you know how large the market is, and the way these workers have been treated by the city governments or by the state, though there are policies, there are entitlements. Now, who do we blame? The markets or the industries who are maximizing their profit are inviting these people. Now, what is their responsibility towards them? Our workers here, when they come, they are made to work on per meter basis. How much per meter of cloth do you weave? Do you manage? Do you XYZ? You know, you contribute to, and you are paid by that, so that you are a piece worker. That's how the definition goes. Now, this person does not appear in any of our databases, neither in the industry, in the factories, because you don't want to formalize them and pay them, which the industry is supposed to. We have beautiful acts. Now that we've gotten into understanding the acts which allow these workers to get fair compensation is not given to them. So it's a huge issue where they are invisible. Our data does not, and because their invisible data does not support their working, you are not interacting with them. They're just a piece of furniture or a piece of machinery. For these fellows are then to maximize their earnings, they work in shifts similar to Mumbai. In some areas, I think we've known this. A bed is given for 3 shifts. The person sleeps for 8 hours, the other person comes, The large halls, which are called mess, are spaces where there's no sanitation, no air, etc., etc. Now, what do we do with them? We have acts. Now, as planning profession, what is our responsibility? We failed to look at building use permissions. We have allowed these buildings to be built. Local governments probably know about that. Sanitation laws are violated. Forget the Factory Act and all of this, the other labor laws which are violated. But if we look at just build environment, which we are all here talking about it, it's a huge violation. How do we really address it? Smaller settlements where also we work in slums and slum-like communities, sanitation, and it was spoken earlier as well, are a huge issues. So where do we see our profession as planning profession and management profession? Because urban management should be and has to be embedded with the planning understanding. Unless we do that, we are creating a profession who don't understand how cities, states, national governments work. And that's a loss. Unless you know how we can tie a thread between that, whatever we talk about inclusive planning, large teams, but we will not know how to convince our counterparts who could be our partners into the process. What we've learned over this years is individuals in the government also want to make change. Governments are not just organizations who don't want to do things. Unfortunately, it's us who professionals are not able to communicate with them and are not able to engage with them. Sometimes, yeah, with their own terms, but there are at least public sector is going to change. And with that optimism, we have been working since 25 years now, and that optimism is important for us to get going. Unless we create an environment where people and the communities and our professions interact, we will not be able to implement anything. So there is nothing like thinking alone. We have to be implementers and be partners with the government and work hand in hand. I think I will make this point and maybe I'll take questions as and when. Dinesh bhai, over to you. Thanks.
Thank you, Manvita. I think that's very useful. Although Fatak will take issue with you about invisible people because he thinks these people are everywhere and they are 70% of our city's population. So we'll see whether they are really invisible or the plan for planners, they are invisible, but they are with all of us. I'll call upon Vatsal now to make his short presentation in 10 minutes. And Devjani, please introduce Vatsal.
Yes. Dr. Vatsal Bhatt consults with the US Green Building Council as the Vice President for Communities, where he helped conceptualize and make operational the LEED for cities and LEDD for communities rating system. He co-leads the Application Frameworks Working Group on the National Institute for Standards and Technology-led efforts for developing IoT-enabled smart cities framework. And he serves on the US Technical Advisory Group for the ISO's Technical Committee 268 for Sustainable Cities. Dr. Bhatt is a senior advisor to the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority for New York State's 100% renewable study and the EPRI project on NYS electric system climate resiliency. Dr. Bhatt, over to you.
Thank you so much, Devyani. Thank you, Professor Mehta, and thanks, CEPT, for inviting me for this discussion. I hope my slides are visible to you all.
Yeah, but hope you don't go through all the 45 of them.
I will be throwing as I took the permission beforehand. I'll go quickly, don't worry. So you have seen what all happening around the world, and since I come from this part of the world, I'll be talking about what is happening in US and what we have seen here, how we are feeling the crunch and what we are doing here. So we know that it's mainly the economy that was hit bad in many different ways. We had budget shortfalls. We had a lot of economic impact. This is just an example done by Drexel University for Philadelphia. You can see what big difference it is. At the same time, we had, all these city officials, employees who were laid off in a big way. And I think health workers were trying to really conjure up all this discussion together and see if at all they can work at the same time. I think Paramita and many other people talked about how people are bringing things together. And here, at least in the US, what we saw that people were really clueless about what to do and how to do, right from top to the bottom. Many people in between tried to make a difference, and I think that was a great way for looking into it. However, here, when we are talking about business recovery, and many of you talked about it, my esteemed colleagues, and this discussion is talking about recovery and what do we do as urban planners. So here we are trying to prioritize long-term goals along with the short-term goals as well. And I think that resilient, sustainable recovery is very much useful to trigger investment in our cities that are making our cities sustainable, resilient over time, and change the behavior of our cities. Obviously, here in the US, some of the scenarios are a little different. But globally, people are seeing that if at all the recovery is made more sustainability, looking into climate change and many other priorities, that would be a great way for us to start the discussion now post-COVID. So here, trying to make well-being and inclusiveness as the key part of the discussion, but also trying to talk about other aspects, since we all know that our urban systems are so much interconnected. Dr. Phatak talked about it, Dr. Tandon talked about it, and many others talked about it as well. So I think here, what we want to talk about is a holistic discussion, looking into all these different aspects. And since I represent U.S. Green Building Council, I just wanted to talk about a small program that I have helped launch here called Lead for Cities and Communities. And we have 112 global cities and communities certified in the last 3 years. This is an example of Hoboken, New Jersey, where Mayor Bhalla is making a big difference. But as Dr. Phatak was trying to talk about holistic urban planning, and trying to talk about performance in which we can talk about the outcomes that the cities are talking about. What I tried to make a difference here is to talk about a holistic rating system that is looking into performance as a prerequisite. And as you can see, we have tried to make performance in all these different aspects of our evaluating an urban system, a city, a community, and trying to make performance the key aspect of it, at the same time, having all these strategies to really improve the performance over time. Nonetheless, we talk about health, pandemic response and all quite a lot in this particular process. And I just wanted to talk about the SDGs and other aspects of it also captured with data-driven discussion, that we are trying to make performance as the key aspect of it with ARC platform. And you can see that we are comparing that performance with other peer cities as well. Again, coming back to these issues of pandemic, we have been seeing that here in US also, the issues regarding class, culture, caste, and race have become quite substantial. And many of you have seen this discussion all across the media over the last 6 to 8 months. And you can see that they are so deep-rooted that we had riots here, and it has a lot of impact on political and economic situation as well. People are facing the trauma, and even during this pandemic, they took out Israelis. So even if we talk about people migrating back in India is a kind of different perspective with which we are looking into it. Here, we are talking about people taking out mass rallies as well. Nonetheless, coming back to the discussion about what all do we want to plan, this is New York City on the left. And you can see that we are talking about empty buildings, but we are also trying to find out ways in which these buildings can be repopulated in much more sustainable ways. And many of these great complexes like Rockefeller Center in New York City or Hudson Yards in New York City, which just got developed, are really trying to talk about their progressive sustainability practices, at the same time health aspects in which they are trying to bring this discussion together. Google, as Professor Mehta was talking about, is trying to talk about carbon-aware load shedding and shifting the load, while other cities and communities are facing a lot of impacts of climate change. We are trying to really focus on the ways in which we can talk about improving the ways in which we consume energy, as well as try to make it efficient. I think Dr. Tandon talked about public spaces and green spaces in our cities. And I think nature-based solutions can become a big part of it, in which we as Lead for Cities and Communities definitely put a lot of emphasis in. And looking into this urban agriculture or urban reforestation. Detroit is a great example. Totally bankrupt city, now trying to turn back, is employing all these different things. And this is about one of the examples from Porto Novo in Milan, where many of you must have seen these buildings being designed by Stefano Boeri, is a big part of what Lead for Cities and Communities does. And this particular district in the center of Milan is working with us. This is DC, and DC was the first LEED certified community, and you might have seen a lot about Black Lives Matter discussion going on, and DC mayor taking a strong stance in that. And the material discussion, circularity discussion, is also going big in cities and communities. And Songdo in Incheon, South Korea, is one of the cities that we are working with, and that is doing a lot of good discussion with circularity and producer responsibility and so on and so forth. Similarly, water is a big issue, and many of our cities in India as well as US are in this particular discussion, and we consume a lot of water. So point is that whenever we are talking about these big cities, how do we really start looking into transportation issues? And as Dr. Tandon was saying, if at all people are going out of the cities, then how do we embrace it? Transportation is a big issue, and here in US, we have faced a lot of issues around it. The ride sharing and all going down, public transport going down. ITDP and other esteemed colleagues are talking about now reconfiguring streets and public transit and so on and so forth. So with a couple of examples from Santa Fe and Albuquerque, we are seeing that some of these cities are trying to really implement the ways in which we look into cities. This is another example of our New York City-based community that is trying to mobilize investments in the post-COVID world to talk about sustainability as well. This is what I would like to end, Professor Mehta. You just talked about some of the big CEOs shouting that cities are going to change their structures. But this is like 2-3 days ago. You can see all the big CEOs are now saying that we need to bring people back to offices and back to cities and back to personal communication. So with that kind of background, I will stop here and wanted to thank you all for this opportunity. Appreciate that.
Thanks a lot. And I think you had a great presentation. I'm sorry if I had to push you to do it within a short time, but I'm sure that you will allow the organizers to share it with all the partners here. So I'm sure people will be able to read through. And I think there are some great lessons that the issues of what we talked about, informalities or people losing jobs in cities, is not just for cities in India, but it's also in the developed world. And we've seen the kinds of issues that the cities in the US have faced, which are in some of them much worse than what it is. There is one interesting question, and I don't know if any one of the panelists wants to take this, and I'm looking at Rajesh and Phatak initially. There's a question about, and I think this is something that Rumi mentioned in her conversation, Manvita alluded to, about the invisible people. So the question is, what can institution like CEPT do to reach out to the community and to inform them about the post-COVID world? So what is the role that the thinkers at CEPT can do? Rajesh, Phatak, we will start with you and then ask other panelists to respond. Rajesh? Hello? Phatak, you can start.
I think let's hold our breath. Nobody really knows what the situation is going to be after post-COVID. And
no, how do you reach out to the community?
So reaching out to the community is okay, but reaching out to the community for what's going to happen in a post-COVID phase, I don't think that should be done. That is not the this is not the occasion. We don't know enough about what is going to happen post-COVID. First of all, when post-COVID is going to occur is not known. And then it will define, how long those impacts are going to be and in what form, and therefore what should be done by people at large or communities. So I think this is not the time to reach out to the community.
Okay, let me rephrase the question. And the question is, what are the formal mechanisms? Rumi talked about that, there is a public hearing, but we all know that only vested interest gets into the public hearing, unlike the town meetings of North America and Europe. Here only a few people get in. What are those formal mechanisms to reach out to what Manvita talked about, the invisible group in our cities? And do planners actually, Rumi says it's very simple to allocate space for vendors, and she herself then said that it's not the, her Karol Bagh experience, that it's, the debates go long. But so what can planners do? How are there formal mechanisms? Are there informal mechanisms? What should we be doing to look at this informal or invisible group of people? And Rajesh talked about the whole participatory approaches. So I'm looking at Rajesh, but I think we've sort of lost him in this conversation. But Manvita, go ahead.
Thanks, Dinesh bhai. I feel there is a responsibility and there are possibilities as well. We know there are formal mechanisms as 74th Amendment does allow formal engagement mechanisms, but there is much more we can do. Though not all states have been able, and we all know about it, not all states have been able to fully comply with the 74th Amendment, which mandates the community participation, the urban governance to be taken to the community in much more decentralized way. What I believe we have to relook at our community engagement component of it. How many, maybe the ward size, maybe the way Kerala has done it could be a takeoff point, but engaging with society and the members of the community becomes important, and that we can as planners, as managers, as thinkers, and then doers, we can all bring together that that an act exists. The implementation of the act has not happened, and that is what I think we all can contribute big time to that.
Rumi, you want to come in on this?
Yeah, am I audible?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I don't know. I mean, we used to do community meetings in the US also. And I remember that it was not smooth sailing over there as well. And I remember that when larger projects were taken to the public over there was always agreement, like on, things like having balanced communities and sustainability and all the big words. Everybody wanted all the good stuff. But the moment a public housing project or a public facility would go for a public hearing, there was a huge backlash even over there. So it's a universal problem. Public participation is required. What is the magic way of doing it? I really don't have an answer, but I do want to share an experience, my experience over the last 10 years in Indian government. What I have seen is that there is participation. ऐसा नहीं है कि participation नहीं है. There is participation. But I find that participation also happens in silos. So there will be one politician who will be sitting with, say, the vendors, or sitting with the poor or the slum dwellers. And there'll be one group sitting with the middle class. And there will be one group doing, taking feedback on email and doing physical surveys. And none of these, now often what we experienced is we got extremely contradictory and, all very violently conflicting feedback from different stakeholders. And the pressure was always on us. that it became our job to balance everybody's needs, which of course as a planner it is our job. However, I think it is also important for people to hear each other. So like the vendor, when he was complaining, and I think the guy who drives 2 cars to Karol Bagh, why can't these two stakeholders sit together and hear them speak? And I don't know the answer to this, but I think there's this also comes from the way our society is, unfortunately, that I don't know how many of us traditionally, probably this generation does, but we really, like when I was living in China, my driver used to be sitting with me like she was like my sister. She was like, short of sleeping on the same bed, we used to do everything together. My cook, my maid, my housekeeper, my driver. She used to give me rides on her cycle. I know she used to cook and we used to eat together, laugh together, go shopping together. I never felt that she was my housekeeper or anything. But in India, I don't see that. It is not very common to sit with your housekeeper or your help or your peon, in the same room, or even make them sit in the same chair. Like how many of us in our office will the guy who's bringing us tea, do we ever ask him to sit next to us on the same chair and have tea with us? We do not do that. And I think it's okay to talk about public participation on paper, but till we are able to bring ourselves to do that, public participation in India is going to remain a farce. I'm sorry, but I feel that's how I.
I think so. All that we teach about planning and pluralism or Jane Jacobs, etc. You think in India we don't have much of room for that? I'm not sure if my colleagues at the faculty agree with that or not.
And I don't think I'm saying that.
Sorry, Fatak.
But I think it's a question of, again, I'll come back to, it's a question of institutions and procedures. I think our Town Planning Act, for example, does not talk of participation, nor does it talk of public hearing. I think we are using those phrases very loosely, assuming that that has to be there. But unless you provide for that, it will not get into the processes. Unlike the environmental clearance, which requires a public hearing and truly public hearing, because then you publish and invite people, etc. In Town Planning Act, it is hearing of suggestions and objections. And that could be done individually, not as public hearing. During the process of formulation, there is no consultation also. I think there is a need to even distinguish between participation and consultation, whether you are following a consultative process or a participatory process.
Shirley Anson's ladder.
And the participation becomes meaningful if you are doing a local area plan, pedestrianizing a street like the Karol Bagh example, or you are doing a public space design and those kind of things. But if you are doing a strategic plan for 20 years for a city like Mumbai, what kind of consultative process can you have? Because if you do it as an open this thing, people will come and say, in my area, there is so much of mosquito nuisance that I can't sleep well. Why don't you do something in the plan? And it does happen. I mean, that is how, therefore, I think all these processes have to be very clearly designed and organized. And the institutions and the procedures have to be also designed in that way so that planners will follow that. Otherwise, the planners will say, no, we are not required to do that. We have to publish our draft plan and invite suggestions and objections. Because that is what the law says.
Yeah, but Fatak, sorry, but that precisely the problem, that then one influential person writes to the chief minister and the whole New Bombay, all the plan gets redone and revisited, etc. Because we do not allow for public discussion, open discussions. Sorry, go ahead.
What I'm saying is, I am agreeing with that, but I'm saying infuse it in the laid down processes and laws. Then it will become established. Otherwise, what happens? The corporators, elected corporators, sometimes say that, why are you doing all this? We are the people's representative. You talk to us. So why are you bypassing us and going to some NGOs?
Yeah.
So all those things have to be properly laid out.
Sorry, I don't want to belabor this issue. There was some other interesting question on Vatsal's presentation and something that Rajesh alluded to in his opening remark that during the COVID era, people were asked to stay home, but in congested spaces we could not, whereas in many countries they said go out, breathe fresh air, etc. And there is a question that the planners have a real challenge of the balance between built up space and open space. And then how do we balance this? And in the post-COVID era where we recognize the need for more open spaces, as planners, I mean, you come from a city of New York where Central Park that Frederick Olmsted did, I think 100 years ago. So he had a great vision. I don't think our city planners have that kind of a vision or even the ability to put together such a large open space in our city plans. So Vatsal, balance between open space and built up space. How do planners decide?
So I think what we have seen here is, again, as you said, Professor Mehta, about decision makers or planners. And I think what we have seen all the times is choosing between the lesser evil. And lesser evil can be in different ways, whether we want to really run out of the cities or try to manage ourselves within cities, or the kind of resources in terms of spaces that we have. So I think what we have seen here is to, if at all I talk about during COVID, then they have given some kind of regulated access to people to various open spaces. And that has worked out in a way. And educating people about wearing masks is a big thing, because even during COVID or right now, we all are doing our normal business. Obviously, restricting ourselves, but keeping masks and distance and so on and so forth. So it is about decision makers to take a decision at a given point of time, and then allocating those resources equally is a kind of process. Obviously, I have seen all the processes in India as well. It takes time. But if I just deviate a little bit from that thought process and give an example of a community that we are working with, there are two communities in St. Paul and Minneapolis region that we are working with. It's about equity, right? So they also need to put in a lot of efforts. They want to make profit. Right now, they are developing a 48-acre campus, or they are developing 112-acre campus. There are two campuses getting developed. What they are saying is we would want to allocate resources as developers for all these types of things, whether we talk about open spaces or we talk about equity, meaning economic access to people. So they want to give surrounding communities and people from the lower income groups to give them access for opening up their shops and all those kind of things. But they said, we want to make it net zero energy as well. We want to make it maximum public space, open space available as well. And still we would want to make profit. So I think people at that level, people at planning level, they need to make this conscious decision by creating scenarios about it, and then trying to run through various ways of looking into it and say, how can I do it? And that's where it would probably happen. Obviously, bringing everybody together, as many of us were talking about, having public participation. And here, I think we have seen it, it works. And nowadays, it goes much more into the details at various different levels. So I think making a business case for any of these things is needed. Otherwise, you won't be able to sell it.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'm reminded by the organizers that the next session is at 6:30. So we will have to wind up this session. I was just, there's interesting discussion. I don't want to really summarize, but I want to still take an issue with my old friend Fatak. And he says post-COVID situation is uncertain and we don't know what is going to happen. So how can we say, but planners have always dealt with uncertainty. Who knew what 20 years plan we make and we project sitting in our desk with all kind of projection, but that is also uncertain. So I think probably the next year, what is going to happen is near future than the 20 years plan that we do. So it's, I think, imperative on the planners that we really need to look at what some of them, some of the interesting issues that came up. Rumi talked about work from home. Is that going to happen if that happens on a larger scale, how will the shape of our cities be? Mobility patterns, working from home, open spaces. Do we really need to reconsider some of these in our physical planning approaches? Do we really need to look at this situation in a different way? We talked about the informal or the invisible. How do we really bring them into the mainstream so that they don't have to rush back if there is a future crisis? So I think these are the issues that I'm going to leave you all with. And thank you, the panelists, for an interesting discussion. And thanks to the organizers for giving me this opportunity to moderate the session. So over to you, organizers. Devjani.
Thank you, sir. Thank you to all the eminent speakers, and thank you to the chair for doing such a fantastic job. I think we are leaving with a lot of engaging and enriching points to dwell upon. I would just request the chair and the panelists to stay on for 2 more minutes, because the organizers at CEPT have a little bit of felicitation organized. So over to you, Anil or Ravi.
Yeah, Satvik, can you take us to the breakout room, please?
Yes, sir.